I want to introduce you to a quirky and somewhat old-fashioned way that we have of referring to triad inversions. And even though this is a little bit old-fashioned, you almost certainly will encounter it in theory classes. Let's start by remembering how we talked about the interval structure of a triad when we first looked at it. We talked about building up the triad from the root, from intervals from the root. And we said the first note of the triad is the root. The next note of the triad, though, is the note that is a third above the root. And then the final note of the triad is a note that is a fifth above the root. In this case, we have a G as the root, a third above the root is the B, and a fifth above the root is the D. And I'm going to write this interval structure right down here. We have the 5 and the 3. And that's the interval structure of a root position chord. Notice, though, if we were to take the same calculations from the bottom note of the first inversion, that interval structure is going to change. So let's calculate the intervals from the bottom note. Even though the bottom note is no longer the root, it's the third. So the B is now the bottom note. Now the first note in the triad above the B is the D, which is a third above the bottom note. And the top note of the triad is now a sixth above the bottom note, even though that top note is now the root. So we have this interval structure of, from the bottom note, we have a third up, and we have a sixth up. And that's sort of the typical or the identifying interval structure of the first inversion. Then we go over to the second inversion. Let's do the same analysis here. Again, from the bottom note. What is the interval structure up from the bottom note? And we have this D in the bottom. So from the D to the G, we have the interval of a fourth. And then from the D to the B, we have the interval of a sixth. So if I just put this down here, we have the interval of a sixth and a fourth, or a fourth and a sixth. And that is sort of the identifying interval structure of the second inversion. Well, it turns out one of the ways in music theory that we identify the three inversions of a chord, the root position, the first inversion, and the second inversion, are by these interval structure numbers, 5-3, 6-3, and 6-4. So if you see the numbers 5-3 next to a chord, like a G 5-3, you know that that's referring to a G that is in root position. If you see the number 6-3, then you know that that is a chord that is in first inversion. And then if you see the number 6-4, you know that that is a chord that is in second inversion. And we'll actually see something like that in a few videos. But here's the problem. Here's where it gets a little bit confusing. This system has been around for so long that we've added some shortcuts to it, which make it a little bit confusing. So the 5-3 has a shortcut or a nickname, which is just nothing. Meaning, if you see a chord symbol like a G, and there's nothing next to it, we're just going to assume that if we don't have any identifying marks next to it, that chord is going to be in root position. The first inversion symbol of 6-3, the nickname or the shortcut name of that is just plain old 6. So if you see a little superscript 6 next to a chord symbol, that means that it is in first inversion. So 6 is just going to be a shortcut or a nickname for 6-3. Then finally 6-4, well, it turns out there's no nickname or no shortcut for 6-4. We just call it a 6-4 chord. But if you see nothing next to a chord, we're going to assume that that's in root position. If you see a single 6 next to the chord, that means it's in first inversion. If you see a 6-4 next to the chord, that means it's in second inversion. I'll remind us of this when we come back and talk about triads and Roman numerals. So be on the lookout for that, because this is often one of the things that we forget most quickly. But this is something that you'll encounter a little bit in this class and even more in upcoming theory classes.